time of hiding behind paper treaties is over." The words echoed in the sterile silence of the Aegeus conclave, spoken by a ghost of light and data 10 meters tall. The avatar of Overlord Boros of the Telkine Dominion was a masterpiece of imperial projection. All sharp angles, polished obsidian armor, and a voice like grinding continents. It loomed over the central dais, a monument to arrogance. Negotiations here were conducted via high-fidelity, life-sized holographic avatars, transmitted instantaneously across the galaxy by a network of relays that twisted space-time to connect distant points. But tonight, negotiation was dead. His speech, a 20-minute tirade of manufactured grievances and veiled threats, had just concluded. He accused the human colony on Heracles 9 of piracy, of aggression, of a cowardice masquerading as pacifism. It was a lie, and every representative present knew it was a lie. But they also knew the truth of the 50 warships of the Telkine 7th Fleet currently burning towards the Heracles system. "We have shown patience," the Avatar boomed, its perfect, resonant voice betraying no hint of the desperation fueling its master. "We have shown restraint in the face of your provocations. You glorify strategic retreat and call it wisdom. You are unworthy of a place among honorable species. You have mistaken our honor for weakness. No more. The 7th Fleet is not on a punitive mission. It is on a mission of restoration. We will restore order to the Elysian Traverse. We will restore respect for the Dominion. And we will begin with Heracles 9. The obsidian giant raised a gauntleted hand, a gesture of finality. "The Dominion no longer recognizes the Terran Mandate's authority in this matter. We will broadcast our operation for the entire galaxy to witness. Let it be a lesson in the price of defiance." With that, the towering avatar dissolved into a cascade of golden motes, leaving a single, quiet projection standing alone in the vast circular chamber. The avatar of Ambassador Kian Koran of the Terran Mandate was, by contrast, an exercise in mundanity. It was human-sized, dressed in a simple, dark gray diplomatic suit, its features rendered with perfect fidelity, but no embellishment. It showed a man in late middle age, with tired lines around his eyes and a mouth set in a permanent state of thoughtful neutrality. The avatar stood perfectly still, a silent statue in the eye of a political hurricane, as the holographic representatives of 100 other species watched, their own projections stirring with unease. The silent tableau held for 10 agonizing seconds. Then Kian Koran's avatar also winked out of existence. By leaving the dais empty, they made their message clear. The talking was done. The command deck of the Terran diplomatic cruiser, Indomitable, was the antithesis of the Aegeus conclave. Here, the recycled air carried the faint metallic smell of hard-working scrubbers, the sharp scent of ozone from high-powered electronics, and the even fainter aroma of brewed calf. The lighting was functional, not dramatic. The metal of the consoles was worn smooth in places from years of use, the deck plates scuffed by the boots of 1,000 duty shifts. This was not a place of unreality. This was a place of work. Kian Koran stood before the main holographic map of the Heracles system. He was no longer the placid diplomat from the Avatar. The man himself was coiled energy, his quiet stillness that of a predator, not a philosopher. His eyes, the same tired eyes from the projection, missed nothing. 50 crimson icons, representing the Telkine fleet, slid across the map, their projected course lines converging on a single, stubborn blue dot labeled H9. His left hand, hanging by his side, clenched slowly into a fist. It was an old habit, one he thought he'd broken. The pressure of his knuckles was a ghost of a different pressure, a different confirmation panel decades ago. For a fleeting second, he caught a phantom scent of ionized air and burning cities, and heard the echo of a voice, preternaturally calm, saying, "Final confirmation received, Grand General. God have mercy on us all." He blinked, and the ghost was gone. Only the map remained. "They've crossed the system perimeter, sir," a crisp voice said from the console to his left. Lieutenant Serena Velez, his executive officer, had a face with sharp, focused features that mirrored the directness of her reports. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that allowed no room for frivolity. "Full battle array, no deviations, exactly as predicted by Mila's models." "They are a predictable people, Serena," Corin said, his voice a low murmur. "It is their greatest strength and their most exploitable weakness." "Heracles 9 is acknowledging the alert via our Ansible link," Velez continued, her fingers tapping across her console to bring up the relevant data streams. "Standing by for your command. Mila Fenn is online." Corin nodded, his eyes still locked on the approaching red tide. "Reactivate my avatar at the Conclave?" Velez paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Sir? Overlord Boros has already departed. The session is effectively over. Procedure would be—" "Procedure is a cage for people who can't imagine a better way," Corin interrupted, his tone mild but laced with steel. "Reactivate the avatar. And Serena—" He turned to look at her, a strange, hard light in his eyes. "I want a public broadcast, raw and unfiltered. I want the galaxy to watch." Velez's professional composure finally wavered. Her jaw went slack for a barest fraction of a second. "Sir, the Conclave Charter, the taboo against propaganda is absolute. Their system is black-boxed. We can't hijack their feed." "I'm not asking you to hijack it," Corin said, a hint of grim smile touching his lips. "I'm asking you to outmaneuver it. Initiate our own direct broadcast from the Indomitable. Open a channel to every independent news service from here to the galactic core. In that broadcast, I want you to embed the Conclave's public observation feed as a picture-in-picture. My avatar will be in their chamber, but my voice will be in our channel. They won't be able to shut us down without going dark themselves, and they won't do that. They're too curious now." Velez stared at him for a beat, the sheer, beautiful audacity of the order sinking in. A spark of something fierce and bright lit her eyes. "Yes, sir," she said, her tone sharp with new energy. "Creating a rapid broadcast and embedding their feed, shattering the spirit of the law, while following the letter. Aye." On the surface of Heracles 9, Mila Fenn stood on a windswept mesa overlooking the sprawling expanse of the Erebus ore processing complex. The wind was a physical presence here, a constant, whining force that tugged at her heavy-duty utility jacket and scoured the rock with fine, abrasive dust. The air carried the scent of ozone from the atmospheric shield generators, a sharp bite of sulfur, and the pervasive metallic smell of 1 trillion tons of processed iron ore. Through the soles of her thick-soled boots, she could feel a constant, deep-seated vibration, the ceaseless thrum of the planet's industrial heart. Above, the first stars of twilight were being blotted out by new, brighter stars, the engine flares of the Telkine's 7th Fleet, descending like vengeful gods. Mila was a geologist by trade, or so her official record stated. She knew the bones of this world better than any living soul. She knew the deep groans of its tectonic plates, the precise composition of its silicate crust, the fury of its geothermal heart. She knew these things because, for the last 15 years, under the guise of geological consulting, she had been turning them into weapons. Her comlink, a rugged piece of hardware built into her jacket's collar, chimed softly. "Coordinator Fenn," a voice crackled. "All stations report ready. The welcoming committee is in place." Mila took a single deep breath, the grit-laced air of familiar comfort. She had spent her youth as a promising tactical analyst under a much younger, much more decorated Kian Koran. He had seen a rare quality in her, a mind for strategy combined with an instinct for systems, for the hidden potential in the mundane. He had sent her here with a secret mandate to take his theoretical dual-use colonial architecture and make it a hardened, practical reality. Today was her final exam. Her face, weathered by the planet's harsh sun and wind, set into a mask of pure, cold steel. "They're in orbital insertion," she said into her calm, her voice now devoid of all emotion, as flat and hard as the mesa beneath her feet. "Phase 1, go." The command was simple. The effect was planetary. Across the continent, the deep, pervasive hum that had been the background noise of colonial life for a decade abruptly ceased. The constant vibration Mila felt through her boots vanished, leaving a sudden, unnerving stillness. The massive orbital freight accelerators, colossal magnetic railguns used to sling refined ore into high orbit, fell silent. Inside their hardened control bunkers, technicians rerouted power and began uploading new firing solutions. They weren't targeting cargo pods anymore. Miles away, at the geothermal power station, enormous exhaust funnels, each the size of a warship, began to pivot. The superheated plasma they normally vented harmlessly into the upper atmosphere was re-sleeved, channeled into pressurized magnetic containment fields. Every piece of heavy industry on Heracles 9, from the seismic pulverizers used to crack ore fields to the atmospheric moisture condensers, had a second hidden purpose. The secret lay not in the hardware itself. You couldn't hide a 30-kilometer-long mass driver. The secret was the doctrine, the software, the central command system that could, with a single command, turn a mining colony into a planetary fortress. The new stars in the sky grew brighter, resolving into the distinct shapes of warships. Mila Fenn watched them come, her expression unreadable. She was just a geologist standing on a rock, and she was about to teach the Telkine Dominion a lesson in planetary science. Back in the silent, grand chamber of the Aegeus Conclave, Kian Koran's avatar reappeared on the central dais. Its sudden return sent a ripple of consternation through the assembled representatives. A Scylan avatar, its body a construct of jointed, dark keratin plates, rubbed its forelimbs together in a gesture of agitation. The gelatinous form of the four-side hegemon wobbled, a clear sign of surprise. Before any could protest, Koran's own broadcast feed flooded the independent news networks. Viewers saw a composed Kian Koran speaking from the bridge of his ship, his image superimposed over the live observation feed from within the conclave chamber itself. He was using their stage, but it was his show. The view then switched to a dozen windows blooming into existence, showing raw, unedited footage from long-range news drones and Heracles 9's own external sensor arrays. One feed showed a squadron of Telkine destroyers descending through the upper atmosphere, their hulls glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Their movements were arrogant, their positioning for a bombardment run on the Erebus complex exact. On the main feed, a transmission from the Telkine flagship, the Iron Resolve, crackled to life. It was Overlord Boros himself, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. "This is Overlord Boros to the illegal settlement on Heracles 9. You have 60 seconds to signal your unconditional surrender. As a sign of our martial seriousness, we will now disable your primary communications array." A Telkine battlecruiser, the Honor's Edge, fired. Not a planet killer, not a city buster, but a single, solid, kinetic slug the size of a ground car. It was a warning shot, a display of overwhelming power and contemptuous control. The slug streaked through the thin air. It never reached its target. From the ground, from what looked like a simple geothermal exhaust station, a lance of incandescent blue-white energy erupted. The beam was no laser. It was a focused jet of pure plasma, magnetically contained and accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. It struck the kinetic slug dead center. There was no explosion in the traditional sense. The slug, a dense mass of hyperalloy, simply ceased to exist, sublimated into vapor in less than a millisecond. The plasma lance didn't stop. It continued on its trajectory, its awesome energy dissipating as it tore a burning scar through the upper atmosphere. On the bridge of the Honor's Edge, alarms shrieked. On the feed from the Iron Resolve, Boros' smug expression vanished, replaced by sheer disbelief. In the Aegeus Conclave, the avian ambassador from the Siren Ascendancy, a creature whose feathers shifted in color from polished bronze to deep indigo, flinched so hard its avatar flickered. Koran's avatar remained utterly still, the calm in the center of the storm. He let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the image of the vaporized slug burn itself into the memory of everyone watching. Then he spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the chamber and out across the news feeds to a billion screens. You explained that we avoid war. That is correct. His avatar's head tilted slightly. We avoid it because we know what it costs. We have ledgers, you see, from our past, detailed accounting of every life, every city, every dream turned to ash. We remember the price tag, every single line item. We avoid war because we, unlike you, have learned to read the bill before we sign the contract. The Telkine ground invasion began with the stark geometry of a well-rehearsed maneuver. Landing craft, shielded against the now active planetary defenses, screamed towards the surface, aiming for a deep, wide canyon that offered a direct, protected route to the Erebus complex. It was the obvious tactical choice. Myla Fenn watched their descent on her own tactical display, a ruggedized tablet synced to a network of hidden seismic and optical sensors. The canyon was codenamed the Funnel. She had personally surveyed it a decade ago.
They're taking the bait.
Deke, her second-in-command, a grizzled ex-miner with a latticework of burn scars on his face, grunted beside her.
Cocky bastards, just like the simulations predicted.
Honor doesn't allow for feints or deceptions, Deke, Myla said, her eyes tracing the icons of the landing craft. They see a straight line to their objective, they take it. The first wave of Telkine shock troops disembarked, clad in heavy armor and carrying pulse rifles. They formed up with a brutal economy of motion, their movements disciplined and aggressive. They pushed into the canyon, their armored boots crunching on the red rock. They expected to meet a hastily assembled militia with mining lasers and repurposed shotguns. They advanced for 2 kilometers, encountering no resistance. Their commanders, watching from orbit, grew more confident. The initial plasma shot must have been a fluke, a one-off superweapon. The ground defenses were clearly negligible. Myla watched a progress bar on her tablet fill to completion. All units are in the designated kill box, she said, her voice flat. Trigger the pulverizers. Deke keyed the command into his console.
Triggering, he confirmed. Waveform resonance is synced.
For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the world began to hum. It wasn't a sound one heard with the ears, but a deep, cellular thrum that vibrated the marrow in Myla's bones. She felt it come up through the rock of the mesa, a sickening, focused resonance that felt like the planet itself was clearing its throat. On the canyon floor, the Telkine soldiers paused, confused. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently. The seismic pulverizers were not weapons. They were industrial tools designed to generate precisely tuned resonance waves to fracture continent-sized plates of iron ore deep underground. They were, in essence, man-made earthquake generators. Mila had installed 3 of them, 1 at the head of the canyon and 2 along its sides, under the guise of deep core geological surveying. Now, their combined power was focused on the fault lines lacing the canyon walls. The hum rose to a grinding roar. High on the canyon walls, massive rock formations, each weighing thousands of tons, began to shear away. The Telkine soldiers looked up, their discipline finally breaking as they saw the sky falling. This was no avalanche. It was a controlled, sequential geological collapse. The pulverizers sent perfectly timed waves of kinetic energy into the rock, turning the canyon into a meat grinder. Entire cliff faces fell inward, burying hundreds of soldiers in an instant. The canyon floor buckled and split, swallowing armored vehicles whole. Mila stood on her mesa, 15 kilometers away, feeling the planetary groan fade through the soles of her boots. She watched the devastation on a live feed from a drone hovering high above, her expression a mask of grim necessity. The red icons representing the Telkine First Wave vanished from her tactical map, wiped clean in a matter of seconds. Her eyes flicked to the next set of incoming alerts. There was no time for remorse. There was no time for anything but the next problem. "Log the dust cloud density and seismic blowback," she ordered, her voice as steady as ever. "Recalibrate the atmospheric condensers. I want that dust settled in 30 minutes. It'll interfere with targeting." The Aegeus conclave was in an uproar. The silent, holographic observers were now murmuring, their synthesized voices a discordant chorus of shock and horror. They had just watched live as an entire armored division was buried alive. This was no battle. It was extermination by geology. Overlord Boros' avatar flickered back into existence on the dais. If his projection could show sweat, it would be drenched. His face, normally a portrait of imperious calm, was twisted in a snarl of pure fury.
"This is not warfare,"
he roared, his voice cracking the conclave's decorum like a whip.
"This is barbarism. You slaughtered our soldiers with cowardly hidden tricks. You have no honor."
Koran's avatar, still placid, subtly turned, as if to address not Boros, but the rest of the silent, watching galaxy. The live feeds shifted. One now showed Telkine orbital platforms targeting not military installations, but the colony's main habitation dome, a clear violation of interspecies rules of engagement. Another showed a captured transmission of a Telkine commander ordering his troops to cleanse the canyon of any survivors. "Honor?" Koran's voice was soft, yet it cut through Boris's rage. "Honor is a luxury. Survival is a necessity. You speak of honor while targeting civilians. You speak of cowardice while your troops are ordered to execute the wounded." He paused, letting the hypocrisy hang in the air. "We did not seek this fight, but you have brought it to us. And since you are so keen on broadcasting lessons, we will provide one." His gaze swept across the other avatars, a teacher addressing a classroom of terrified students. "And we do it for you, to show you that there are ways to end a conflict that do not involve shattered worlds or generations of bloodshed. This is a lesson in proportionality, a lesson the Telkine Dominion has clearly forgotten. We are offering them an opportunity to learn it again. For all your sakes, watch closely. This is what happens when an immovable object of ideology meets an unstoppable force of pragmatism." Deep in the shadow of Heracles IX's largest moon, The Magpie hung in silent running. Its hull was a patchwork of radar-absorbent plating and jury-rigged heat baffles. Inside, the cockpit was cramped, lit only by the green glow of the tactical display. The pilot, call sign Sparrow, chewed on a nutrient stick, her focus absolute. "Targets are locked," her co-pilot muttered, his own face illuminated by the console. "Command confirms the window's open. They've pulled their pickets." "Amateurs," Sparrow breathed. "They're chasing ghosts." The colony defense fleet was, on paper, a joke. A handful of retrofitted asteroid miners and deep space freighters. In reality, they were a hornet's nest. Smuggled military-grade drives and cutting-edge electronic warfare suites turned them into phantoms. Sparrow's hands swept over her controls, a fluid sequence of taps and slides. "Initiating ghost strike sequence. Mark?" The Magpie's engine flared for a fraction of a second. The ship didn't accelerate. It simply vanished, executing a micro-jump that flung it across 1,000 kilometers of space in an instant. It reappeared on the flank of a Telkine logistics train, 3 lumbering unarmed tenders ferrying ammunition and repair drones to the main fleet. They were completely unprotected. "Payloads away," Sparrow said calmly. 2 kinetic impactors, essentially just dense metal rods, launched from the Magpie's external hardpoints. They struck the lead ammo tender, punching through its thin hull and detonating its cargo in a silent, brilliant flash of light. Simultaneously, the Magpie broadcast a high-density burst of data, a tiny, dormant cyber warfare package aimed at the secondary tender's comms system. It was designed to slip past the Telkine firewalls during the chaos of the explosion, creating a network of hidden backdoors into their battlenet, a digital time bomb. Before the light of the explosion had even reached the other Telkine ships, Sparrow initiated another jump. The Magpie flickered and was gone, reappearing 20 seconds later on the opposite side of the system to harass a different, equally vulnerable target. All across the system, 24 other freighters were doing the same. They never engaged in a direct fight. They struck at fuel depots, comms relays, sensor drones. They created the illusion of a much larger, ubiquitous force, sowing chaos and systematically dismantling the Telkine ability to sustain a prolonged fight. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Overlord Boros swept a data slate from a console, sending it clattering to the deck. His face was livid, a mask of crimson rage.
"Report!"
he bellowed. Subcommander Vrek, his second in command, a grim-faced veteran with the scars to prove it, stood rigidly.
"Sir, we've lost another fuel tender. The supply depot at Lagrange Point 3 is no longer responding. Our fleet-wide diagnostic is compromised. We're getting ghost signals, false readings. It's like they're inside our network."
"Find them!"
Boros slammed his fist on the command throne's armrest. The polished metal dented.
"These gnats, these vermin, they refuse to stand and fight with honor."
"Sir,"
Vrek said, his voice carefully neutral,
"their tactics are disruptive, but effective. They are targeting our logistics. At this rate of attrition, we will be unable to maintain the planetary blockade for more than 48 hours. Perhaps we should consolidate, protect our supply lines and the jump lane."
"Protect?"
Boros wheeled on him, his eyes blazing with fury and something else. The wild, cornered look of a man haunted by generational shame. His grandfather had been exiled for retreating from an unwinnable battle, a stain on House Korith that Boros had sworn his life to erase. He would not be the second Korith to be branded a coward.
"We are the Telkine 7th Fleet. We do not protect. We attack. We will pound this miserable rock into dust. I want the heavy escorts, the vengeance, and the unflinching to break formation. Hunt down these ghosts. I want their engine blocks mounted on my bulkhead.
Rex's face became an impassive mask, but for an instant, his eyes betrayed a deep despair. It was the exact, predictable error the human commander had been baiting them into, pulling the two heaviest combatants from their guard positions on the fleet's only lifeline, the delicate jump lane relay that allowed for faster-than-light travel back to the Dominion.
"As you command, Overlord,"
Rex said, his voice hollow. He turned to issue the orders, knowing he was signing their death warrant. Boros, in his desperate, honor-bound rage, had just left his only door home standing wide open. In the Aegeus conclave, the news feeds reflected the tactical shift. The hulking forms of the Telkine heavy battleships, the Vengeance and the Unflinching, could be seen breaking from their defensive positions and powering up their main drives, preparing to chase the phantom signals of the CDF. Simultaneously, the remaining battlecruisers reoriented, their primary weapon ports opening as they prepared for a full-scale orbital bombardment of Heracles 9's population centers. A collective gasp went through the assembly's avatars. This was it. The escalation from a tactical engagement to planetary annihilation. This was the barbarism Boris had accused the humans of. Kian Koran's avatar watched the Telkine fleet move. The moment he had engineered, the moment he had dreaded, had arrived. The quiet ambassadorial mask finally fell away completely. The change was not dramatic, yet it was terrifying in its subtlety. The set of his jaw hardened. The weariness in his eyes was burned away by a cold, ancient fire. On the bridge of the Indomitable, he gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Veles. As she relayed the final go-ahead to the hidden CDF force, Karan's hand, resting on the command console's rail, trembled for a fraction of a second. A fleeting palsy he quickly stilled by tightening his grip on the cool metal. The Grand General was back. His voice dropped, losing all its previous pedagogical calm, becoming a whisper that was somehow louder and more chilling than all of Boros's roars. "And all this we do to save you." He paused, letting the words sink in, his avatar's gaze sweeping across the stunned representatives. "From us." At that precise moment, on the tactical feed, a new set of icons flared to life. The main force of the colony defense fleet. They hadn't been scattered across the system. The ghost strikes were a feint, carried out by a small squadron of specialized ships. The bulk of the CDF, a dozen heavily armed and shielded freighters, had been lying dormant in the deep shadow of Heracles 9's primary gas giant, waiting. They emerged at maximum burn, not on a course for the Telkine fleet, but for the now exposed jump lane relay. The Telkine jump lane relay was not a fortress. It was a delicate, complex piece of engineering, a massive ring of exotic matter projectors that bent space-time to create a stable corridor back to the Dominion, and it was now defended by only a handful of light pickets. They never stood a chance. The CDF force didn't even slow. They fired on the approach, a massive volley of kinetic slugs, plasma torpedoes, and heavy lasers. The picket ships were swatted aside like flies. The volley slammed into the relay's central spindle. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The massive ring structure buckled, a flash of brilliant, silent blue energy. The raw power of distorted space-time erupted outwards. The stable corridor it maintained collapsed in on itself, creating a shockwave of gravitational shear that tore the relay into a twisted ruin of scrap metal. The route home for the entire Telkine 7th Fleet, a fleet 50 warships strong, vanished. They were effectively trapped. More than that, they were stranded. 1,000,000 light years from home, with dwindling supplies, a compromised battle network, and a fortress world at their beck that had just proven it could kill them with rocks. The news struck the Aegeus conclave with the force of a shockwave. A profound silence fell, the quiet of 100 different species simultaneously realizing they had fundamentally, catastrophically misunderstood humanity. On the bridge of the Indomitable, the air crackled. Every officer was still, their gaze fixed on the tactical display that showed the Telkine fleet in disarray, their comms channels a chaos of panicked, contradictory orders. Overlord Boros has ordered the bombardment to commence, Lieutenant Veles reported, her voice tight. He's going for scorched earth. If he's going down, he's taking the colony with him. Karan's face was a mask of cold granite. He had hoped Boros would see reason. He had hoped wrong. He's committed, Karan said, his voice dangerously soft. The animal's cornered, so it lashes out. Very well. He turned to Veles. Get me a direct visual to his bridge. Full override. I want my face on his main view screen. Velez's fingers flew. Sir, the cyber warfare package Sparrow's team planted, it's active. Their internal bridge security is ours. We have a one-time key to their command channel. Excellent, Karan said. There was no triumph in his voice, only a deep, profound weariness. And Serena, pull up the file on House Korath. Cross-reference with Telkine military archives, specifically the court-martial of Grand Admiral Thrax Korath, Boros' grandfather. I want the verdict and the sentencing statement on my screen now. Velez's eyes widened slightly as she understood. This moved past military maneuver into psychological execution. Aye, sir. File is up. In the conclave chamber, the chaos of the feeds was suddenly overridden. Karan's avatar raised a single hand. All the windows showing the space battle vanished, replaced by one single crystal-clear image. The red-lit, frantic bridge of the Telkine flagship, the Iron Resolve. At its center, screaming orders at his terrified subordinates, was Overlord Boros. He froze as the main view screen before him, which had been showing the surface of Heracles 9, flickered and was replaced by the calm, tired face of Kian Karan. Karan's avatar in the conclave spoke, but his voice was now synced to the image on the Iron Resolve's bridge, a direct, inescapable accusation. Overlord Boros of the declining House Korath, Karan said, his voice a quiet storm. Like your grandfather before you, you have misjudged your battle. Grand Admiral Thrax was court-martialed for retreating from the Cygnus salient when his supply lines were cut, an act of prudence for which he was stripped of his rank and exiled, an act which saved 10,000 Telkine lives. Karan leaned forward slightly, his avatar mimicking the motion, creating the unsettling impression that he was about to step through the screen. But your grandfather was merely exiled for retreating from an unwinnable fight. You will be remembered for losing a war you had, by your own metrics, already won before you fired a single shot. Karan looked directly into the camera on his own bridge, his gaze piercing through the technology, through the light years of space, as if he were staring directly into Boros' soul. His right hand unconsciously drifted to his left wrist, his thumb tracing the faint, pale line of a scar half hidden by his cuff, a memento from a long-forgotten battlefield. His voice dropped to a whisper, a sound that carried the weight of Armageddon, a sound meant only for Boros and his crew, yet broadcast for the entire galaxy to hear. It was a voice laced with a profound personal disgust, as if the words themselves were poisonous on his tongue. You have ordered the bombardment of a civilian population, an act of petulance, an act of spite, an act that will gain you nothing but a footnote in the history of atrocity. Recall that order. Boros, stunned into silence, just stared, his mouth agape. I see you hesitate, Karan continued, his voice now colder than the vacuum of space. You believe you have nothing left to lose. You are wrong. Recall your bombardment order, or I will authorize the launch of the Hellbore Cascade. A murmur went through the conclave. The name was unknown. A phantom. I see you don't recognize the name, Karan said, a terrible glint in his eyes. We have never spoken it aloud before. The Cascade is not a weapon I have here, Overlord. I do not need it here. But I hold the only authorization key in this sector of the galaxy. And our records of your primary jump lane routes are very, very good. The Hellbore Cascade is a network of automated facilities, hidden in places you will never find. When I give the order, they will launch drone swarms. He paused, letting the full horror of his words sink in. These drone swarms are cloaked, cold-running, and broadcast 1 million phantom signals for every real unit. They are not designed to fight your defenses, Overlord. They are designed to be an invisible, incurable plague. They will travel to your homeworld. A single drone reaching the surface is all it takes for the self-replicating nanites to begin their work, converting the silicates in your planet's crust into a hyper-unstable compound. Your point defenses might shoot down 99.9% of them, but the mathematics of infection are absolute. Karan's voice was utterly devoid of emotion, the voice of a man reading from a ledger of damnation. We will not conquer you, Boros. We will not occupy your cities or enslave your people. We will not even bomb you from orbit. We will issue a single command from this ship, and in 3 months' time, your world will crack apart from the inside out. We will erase the very memory of your planet from the star charts. Your house will not be a footnote in a history book. It will be a void in the heavens. Your people will not be a conquered race. They will be a ghost story. That is why we avoid war, Overlord, because we know how to end them. Unconditionally, irrevocably. Recall your order. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, the spell was broken. Boros' officers were no longer looking at their commander. They were staring at the calm, human face on the view screen, their own faces pale with a terror beyond the scope of mere battle. They had heard the threat, not against a colony, but against their home, their mates, their children, their world. They heard the specific, surgical shaming of their overlord's lineage, exposing his motivations not as honorable, but as personal and pathetic. They saw a commander who, in a fit of pique, had brought not just defeat, but the threat of absolute species-level annihilation upon them all. Their loyalty, forged in the rigid honor codes of the Dominion, shattered like glass. Sub-Commander Vrek took one step forward, his hand moving towards his sidearm. He didn't need to draw it. The look in his eyes was enough. It was a look of pity, contempt, and mutiny. Overlord Boros saw it. He saw that look mirrored in the eyes of every officer on his bridge. The fury drained out of him, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. His failure was absolute. He had been so completely outmaneuvered that he had become a threat to his own people. The shame he had sought to erase had now consumed him, magnified 1,000-fold. He stumbled back a step, his grand, imposing figure seeming to shrink. He looked at the faces of his crew, at the implacable face of the human on his screen. and he crumbled.
"Signal the fleet,"
he whispered, his voice the dry rasp of a broken man.
"Disengage the bombardment. Power down weapons."
He sank into his command throne, no longer an overlord of the Dominion, but a prisoner on his own bridge. In a makeshift aid station set up in the shadow of a captured Telkine landing craft, the air was thick with red dust and the scent of antiseptic. Sub-Lieutenant Brev of the Telkine 7th Fleet sat on a metal crate, his armored cuirass removed, revealing the sweat-soaked tunic beneath. His left arm, burned by a plasma splashback during the initial retreat, was wrapped in clean, white Terran med gauze. He stared at the steaming bowl of nutrient paste a human medic had just pressed into his hands. He hadn't eaten in 2 days.
"Why?"
the Telkine finally rasped, the small plates on his cheeks fluttering, a gesture of profound confusion. His entire life, his entire culture, was built on the principle that the defeated were unworthy, to be left behind so as not to weaken the whole. This was illogical. The medic, a human woman whose face was lined with her own bone-deep fatigue, paused in her work on another soldier. She looked at Brev, her eyes holding no judgment, no triumph, only a vast, weary empathy. She just shrugged. "Because you were hungry," she said, her voice rough. She then turned and moved on to the next wounded soldier, her movements economical, each one serving a purpose without a wasted gesture. Brev looked down at the bowl. It was warm in his hands. He watched the medics retreating back, then looked around at the other scenes of quiet, determined compassion. Humans treating Telkine wounded with the same care they gave their own. The warm bowl in his hands suddenly felt heavier than his pulse rifle had ever been. It was a weapon of a kind he had never encountered, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that his dominion had no defense against it. Kian Karan stood on the quiet bridge of the Indomitable, observing the feeds of the ongoing rescue and aid operations. The crimson icons of the Telkine fleet were no longer hostile, but blinking yellow, signifying their acceptance of aid and their formal surrender to the mandate's authority pending diplomatic resolution. A soft chime sounded from Velez's console. "Sir?" she said, her voice holding a note of awe. "Priority 1 alert. It's a private channel request from the Aegis Conclave. It's the avatar of the Scylan hierarchy." The Scyllans were a major power, an ancient race of beings known for their xenophobic isolationism and military might. They had been silent observers throughout the entire crisis. "Put them through," Karan said. A section of the main screen resolved into the stark black avatar of the Scylan representative. The posture of the avatar was subtly different than it had been in the Conclave, less rigid, less arrogant, almost deferential. "Ambassador Karan," the Scylan's synthesized voice grated, the sound lacking its usual sharp, dismissive edge. "We have observed the resolution of the Heracles 9 incident. The Scylan hierarchy concedes that we have misjudged the Terran mandate." The avatar paused, a gesture of profound political significance for a race that never admitted error. "Your strategic restraint is logical. Your final deterrent is absolute. We wish to open negotiations to discuss a mutual defense pact." Kian Karan looked at the arthropodal face on the screen, then at the tactical map showing his medical ships tending to his former enemies. He allowed himself a small, hard, tired smile. The beast was back in its cage. The cage was stronger than ever, and for the first time, the rest of the galaxy finally understood the lock was never meant to keep others out. It was meant to keep the beast in. They were finally
learning the right lesson.